Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome to Beach Walk Blog. Today, again, we are talking about the sling method. We are talking about the basic 8. Now, last time we talked about the runner's rehab and why every runner should be going through the runner's rehab. We talked about gait analysis, we talked about self-myofascial release, we talked about posture, we talked about retensioning and rebalancing of muscles and coordination of the posture. And today, the basic 8, it's a little bit different. So some of you might know that the body moves in 3 planes of motion. So we've got forward, side to side, and rotation. So those are your 3 planes of motion: forward and backward, side to side, and rotation. And rotation is across the transverse plane, so it's this horizontal plane, right? Forward and backward, that could also be straight up and down, because that is a sagittal plane movement as well, because we're not moving sideways and we're not rotating, so it's still movement within the sagittal plane. Now, when we run, we are moving in all 3 planes of motion. And that, I know that's confusing for some people, because you're like, well, no, it isn't, because I'm not going sideways. It's like, no, that's not quite how it works. If I lift my pelvis up on the left, that means I've lifted it or pulled it down on the right, and vice versa. If I depress my right shoulder girdle, you might not see that my spine laterally flexes. If I tilt my right shoulder down and my left shoulder up, so I depress my right shoulder and elevate my left shoulder, that is a frontal plane movement. That's a sideways movement. I don't have to literally be locomoting sideways like a crab in order to be moving my body in the frontal plane. Now, what you might also be thinking is, well, how is running involving the transverse plane, the rotational, the horizontal plane? Okay, this is a really simple one, but it's quite complicated for most people to understand, or for a lot of people to understand, because every single joint rotates. I know that's really confusing, but I'm going forwards. That's the sagittal plane. Yeah, the sagittal plane of motion forwards. However, my spine rotates like this, right? My shoulders rotate, my pelvis rotates, my hip joints rotate within their sockets. Contrary to popular belief, the knee joint actually rotates as well. So as it flexes, it rotates inwards, it internally rotates, medially rotates, and as it extends, it externally rotates, laterally rotates. The foot rotates, right? When we pronate and supinate, those movements are transverse plane movements, because they're multi-plane actions. Okay, so that's how we move in the transverse plane. If I rotate my torso, my neck, my cervical spine also rotates, or it counter rotates. Okay, so there's a lot of rotation going on, and that's really what a lot of people miss in their movement training, or in their training period, because they do too many things that are stuck in the sagittal plane. That doesn't help you. Deadlifts, squats, planks. You know, all of these things are stiffening. They're stiffening you into the sagittal plane. They're not using the rotational plane. So what we do in the basic 8, we combine lateral flexion, so movement in the frontal plane, side to side, where I'm depressing my shoulders and elevating my shoulders. I'm elevating my pelvis and depressing my pelvis. And then I rotate my spine. I learn to rotate and combine these movements. And we talked about this in the gait analysis masterclass that I did yesterday and last week, and I'm doing another one next week as well, next Thursday. We talked about how we move through the gait cycle, and all the different parts, all the different slinging actions that combine and coordinate to make that happen. Now that's what we train in the basic 8. We train that spine to laterally flex and rotate really well. which is different to what we did in the runner's rehab. The runner's rehab, it's more about gaining control of the sagittal plane, the forward-backward plane of motion. So think of my curves of my spine, think of the curves of your spine, the forward and backward S-shaped curve, the tilt of your pelvis, the forward head position that a lot of people have, the rounded thoracic spine, it's called a kyphosis, the way that we can't lift our rib cage, it's kind of pointed down at the ground. These are things that are in the sagittal plane, and we focus on those things in the runner's rehab. But the basic 8 is all about movement in the gait cycle. So if you think about it this way, and I like things that rhyme, the basic 8 is about your gait. Okay? The basic 8 is working on your gait, because it's working on not only just the movement of your body in its pieces, but also coordinating those through half of a gait cycle, so one step. So we're things like the step and press, we start with our right leg in front and we finish with our left leg in front. We start with our left leg in front, we finish with our right leg in front. So it's half of a gait cycle, so you're working on half of a gait cycle movement in the basic 8. So the basic 8 is training your gait, okay? And I did it that way for a reason, because I like things that rhyme. So it's gait training, gait strengthening, okay? Gait movement strengthening, because remember, strength is specific to the movement. If you're not training the movement, you're not strengthening the movement. And in order to strengthen the movement, we must coordinate that movement to occur. So if you're not coordinating that movement, you're not strengthening that movement. Okay? So really, that's it. So what we do is we have something called a checklist, and that sets us up for every exercise that we do in the basic 8. So what we learn in the runner's rehab, we bring those things with us into the basic 8. Those things we want to learn, we want to kind of like commit those things to memory so that when we do the movements in the basic 8, we don't kind of sabotage our posture as we move through the gait cycle, because that's what a lot of runners, a lot of injured runners especially, what they do is their posture is sabotaged by their movement. Because remember, posture can be static and dynamic, and the way it is when it's dynamic is affected by the way it's able to be in a static position. I.e., if you cannot move your pelvis out of an anterior pelvic tilt, then you are stuck in an anterior pelvic tilt. Then you will only have one option, which is to stay there. So we work on getting that anterior pelvic tilt all sorted and out and able to be moved into a posterior tilt position, or in fact out of an anterior tilt. And then in the basic 8, we look to bring that availability that you now have of movement through your pelvis into the movement of our gait cycle, or indeed half a gait cycle, one step. And we work on all of the things that we learn in the runner's rehab. So how to pronate, how to supinate, how to maintain our alignment as we move through half of a gait cycle. Because it's a learning process. You're learning how to move well. And the mistake that a lot of people make is, firstly, their posture is terrible. Secondly, their availability of movement at each joint is terrible because they're stuck. And then thirdly, they start running and everything goes wrong because of the first two things I just mentioned. So, and then they wonder why they're injured. But they never do the gait analysis to figure out what's going on and then they never do the postural work and the retentioning work and the myofascial release work to help them then gain control of their posture and their tension, to then allow them to move in a way that's not going to injure them. And that is what we do in the runner's rehab, and then bring that into the movements in the basic 8. So they're very different, they're completely different, but even though they are different, what we learn from the runner's rehab we bring with us into the basic 8. And that's very, very, very important, because unlike when you go into a gym and you go from, let's say, the bicep curl machine or doing bicep curls to doing shoulder presses, they're completely different movements, and they have a completely separate list of requirements and cues. Whereas what we're doing in the runner's rehab and the basic 8, and indeed the entire sling method, we use the checklist that I just talked about, the form checklist, how to position yourself, how to line yourself up initially before you move. We use that checklist in pretty much everything we do. So when we go into the intermediate 10 and we go into the rotational torque training and we go into the centrifugal force training, we use that same checklist as the kind of like the foundation for everything, because that's all we need, because we're working on our gait cycle movement. We're not doing shoulder presses and squats and bicep curls and lat pulls and rows and shoulder raises and tricep presses and leg extension. We're not doing all that. It all relies on our alignment and our posture and our ability to maintain or produce movements through the gait cycle. So if you learn that checklist, that's really, and it's not that difficult, it's like 5-6 points really, and I really make it very, very easy to learn, because we go from the ground up or the top down, and then we just remind ourselves as we're going through the exercise, where is my weight? And that's it. It won't take you long to learn it. You know, it'll take you a couple of minutes to learn it, but then you got to apply it, right? So it's like learning a word in a foreign language, and then you don't apply it, you don't use it, so you forget it. It's the same thing with movement. You know, you learn how to move. You learned how to move when you were a kid, but you didn't carry it on. You pretty much, we all do to a point. We bastardize our posture, we bastardize our movement because we want to look buff or we want to do a certain sport, and we get good at doing that and we screw ourselves up. So there's the water. I can only lead you to the water. I can't make you get in or drink it. It's up to you. If the things that I'm saying make sense, it's your time to get in. Alright? There's the water. Do you want to get injury free? The basic 8. That's the movement of gait. Strength training for your gait. Strength training for running. It's that simple. Alright? Remember, you're not strength training the running movement if you're not training the running movement. That doesn't mean just going out for a run. It means strength training the movement, applying resistance to all the movements, all the limb actions, all the pelvis movements, the shoulder movements, and that's what we do in the basic 8. Alright? And there we go. There's your basic 8 beach walk blog. Take care. Have a good day. Talk to you soon. Bye.